Hello, my name is Steve Antonuccio, and this is the second program in my series on the historic films of the Pikes Peak region. I worked for the Pikes Peak Library District for 20 years as a librarian, producing documentaries and creating this collection of historic films. There's about 100 total that I documented, collected, and cataloged. And so the first part, I only covered just a few of these films. So I'm going to kind of review some of the things we talked about in the first program. But everything, all my stories are in my book. There is no such thing as a typical librarian. It's available on Amazon for $19.95. If you have any questions, you can email me at anton1492@gmail.com. Well, during my 20 years working for the Pikes Peak Library District, I had a wonderful opportunity. We had a cable access channel. The cable company provided us with a channel as well as some funding for programming. And I, kind of like a cook, I had to come up with filling that channel. So I focused on local history. But we're very fortunate because the community of Colorado Springs has always been a beautiful place, the entire Pikes Peak region. So it's attracted the best photographers and the best filmmakers to this area, including the Alexander Film Company, which moved to Colorado Springs in 1928. So we have an incredible collection of photographs and films since the city was founded in 1871. Certainly photography was in its heyday at that point. And then the first film that was shot in El Paso County was in 1897. So pretty much the history of Colorado Springs has been documented with still photography and motion picture film. And the wonderful thing about the Pikes Peak Library District is we have an incredible special collections, which is housed in the Carnegie Library. And unfortunately, right now, because of the coronavirus, the library is closed, but we're hoping that'll reopen soon. But many of the photos you can find in the collection on their digital archives, and many of the films that I'm going to feature today, you can watch in their entirety on YouTube. So we've got a great collection that is still accessible even during these trying times of the virus. But the reason why there's so many films is because of these two guys, the Alexander brothers. Very different personalities. They were 10 years different in age. The older brother, J. Don, on the left, was the heart of the company. He was a salesman, a natural salesman, very extroverted. He could sell anybody anything. And the younger brother was an introvert. He was a electrical engineer, a Rhodes Scholar, brilliant mind, and he was the brains behind the company. So the reason why the company was so successful is because J. Don Alexander saw this opportunity. He saw that people were going to silent films, which were very popular at that time, and he saw the growth of consumerism, the mass production of automobiles and other household items. And he thought, since people are going to the movie theaters, maybe we could produce films, what they called advertising playlets, to promote these local businesses and their products. So we had this audience going to these silent films. And it worked. It was an incredible idea. In fact, it's still going on today. If you go to a movie theater, you'll see film trailers as well as many products being sold between the feature films. So it was a great concept. And so he realized that he couldn't do it if his company was on the West Coast. He needed to centralize. So he moved the entire operations to Englewood, Colorado, who's in the center of the country. And he decided that if he was going to service his clients, he needed to take advantage of the air travel. This is before overnight mail delivery service. This is before long-distance phone calls. So he saw a real opportunity, and he decided to invest in state-of-the-art of the biplanes at the time that his salesmen could use to fly to these small towns and sell their advertising playlets. Well, unfortunately, he was very unhappy with the state-of-the-art of biplanes. Because World War I had ended, there really hadn't been much advancement in the biplanes in the United States. So he went to his brother, Don M. Alexander, and he said, you're a bright guy, you're an electrical engineer. I think we could make a better biplane than what is out there. And like in the past, his brother said, well, let me investigate it. He hired some good aeronautical people to help design the plane. And they created their own airplane called the Alexander Eagle Rock. And this is a plane being christened by J. Don's wife, Gertrude Metz Alexander. Well, the plane was an incredible success. They sold about 800 across the country. And overnight, within the first 10 years of the company even operating, they became millionaires. And of course, if you're a millionaire during the Great Gatsby era, this is how you dress, like a Monopoly millionaire. You had a felt hat and a big cigar and a fur coat. And of course, it fit J. Don's personality because he was an extravagant, outgoing person anyway. Of course, his brother, the introvert, dressed a little more conservatively, and this is Don Miller Alexander, the electrical engineer in his prime. So they moved their entire operations to Colorado Springs, Colorado in 1928. Colorado Springs offered them some free land and business opportunities, and of course it was a beautiful area with Pikes Peak in the background, wonderful place to shoot these advertising playlets. And they became very successful making their aircraft and also selling the advertising playlets. In fact, they were the largest producer of advertising commercials in the country. And they decided to make a second plane called the Alexander Bullet. And it was the fastest plane at the time. It could go 140 miles an hour. It had retractable landing gear as well as an enclosed cockpit. And J. Don took it to an air show in Chicago. And everybody loved the plane. He had 50 contracts when he came back to Colorado Springs. But this was 1929. And of course, we all know what happened in 1929. The stock market crashed. And the market for small planes like this completely evaporated. So they only made 5 of these planes. They continued to make the Alexander Eagle Rock for the next couple of years. But eventually they did close down their aircraft business and just focused on the Alexander Film Company, which was still very successful during the Depression era. People would spend their last nickel to go to a movie, and advertisers had to fight for the consumer dollar, so they needed advertising even more than ever before. But there is a few Alexander Eagle Rocks. There are no Alexander Bullets out there. This Eagle Rock is in the Weisbrod Museum in Pueblo, Colorado, and there's one at DIA and there's one at the Seattle International Airport. This plane was restored by Don Bymaster of Colorado Springs. And this is the Alexander Film Campus back in 1948, probably, when things were going very well. They were at the height of their production. They had 600 employees. This is before television really took off, which kind of cut into their market because they were more devoted to the theater owners producing these commercials. They did eventually get into the television market, producing advertising for the top 3 automakers and some of the other Fortune 500 companies in the country. But I want to start out by showing a promotional film they did about this time in 1948 on the Alexander Film Company, and also show a sample of some of the commercials they produced.
This is beautiful Colorado Springs at the foot of Pikes Peak. 6 railroads and 2 airlines offer fast mail and express service. The Pikes Peak region, famed for scenic grandeur and bright sunshine, is a photogenic paradise. Located at Colorado Springs is the Alexander Film Company, world's largest producer and distributor of short-length screen advertising, employing over 600 people at the home studio. From the administration building, the activities of about 150 field representatives are supervised. In the Mammoth Stage Building, the finest of short-length advertising films are produced. And from the specially designed Service Department building, over 150,000 feet of film are shipped every day to many of the 9,500 theaters which exhibit these movie playlets for more than 24,000 advertisers. Sales of many nationally known products are promoted with Alexander movie programs on a manufacturer-dealer cooperative basis. These films are produced exclusively for the manufacturer and demonstrate his products throughout. The fact that many manufacturers authorize the Alexander Film Company year after year to produce their movies is proof of continued satisfaction. More and more companies are coming to Alexander for the finest of screen advertising, seen every day in thousands of theaters. Now let's follow the production of Alexander short-length advertising from start to finish. First, advertising writers with motion picture experience prepare the scenarios or work with the advertisers on scenarios prepared by them. After the scenarios have been approved, elected, all preparations are subject to the approval of the advertiser's representative assigned for technical supervision. Lights, action, camera, and production is underway. Cameramen who know every trick of the trade work with experienced directors and technical supervisors. Meanwhile, the art department is producing the animations and titles that help the playlet tell the advertiser's story. Here also is made the dealer's name trailer that will follow the playlet on the theater screen. The films from the stage, art, and sound cameras are processed and edited in the Alexander Film Company's own laboratory. Here, more than 1.5 million feet of film a month are developed and printed using exclusive Alexander processes. Coordination of stage, art, sound, and laboratory results in the finest of short-length advertising playlets and identifying trailers such as those that follow. If you are one of the homemakers who find that adding variety to the daily menu is a problem, here's an inexpensive way to vary your meals. Include fresh, tasty bakery goods. For breakfast through dinner, there are many palate-pleasing delights. Your family will agree fresh bakery goods are a delightful addition to every meal. When the family gets together on a project like this, there's real fun for everyone. And for added pleasure, there's a big supply of crystal clear 7-Up in the refrigerator. You see, 7-Up is the all-family drink. There's more fun than ever in your living room when you're the proud owner of a smart new Motorola television set. Motorola is tops in engineering and in styling, too. Motorola gives you the ultimate in performance and a glowing pride of ownership. Smart Motorola cabinets are packed full of amazing new exclusive electronic developments. See, Motorola, your eye tells why Motorola's a better buy. Colorado's famous Garden of the Gods, one of the most beautiful of America's tourist spots. And here's the most beautiful way to see America. In a sparkling new Pontiac, the most beautiful thing on wheels. Powerful, smooth, dependable, and economical, Pontiac is low in price. Your own experience will tell you that dollar for dollar, you can't beat a Pontiac.
Hiya, folks. I'm from Philco, famous for quality the world over.
I'm Blur. And I'm Smear. We just love television.
Not to ruin it, you mean? I'll fix you.
Get Philco balanced beam television, Peepsqueak. No blur, no smear, just a clear picture. Clear, sharp, perfectly focused over the entire picture area. Yes, Philco balanced beam brings you the finest picture in television. A well-organized service department with special equipment and trained personnel schedules and ships the playlets and attached trailers so that they reach the local theaters each week at the proper time for showing. The advertiser has no screening worries. Before closing, let us consider some of the outstanding advantages of motion picture advertising. The illustrations in printed advertising are motionless, silent, like this. We add the voice of radio, the picture comes to life in natural color, and details are shown in billboard proportions. Thus, we combine sound, action, color, and detail enlargement to produce advertising that commands the undivided attention of millions of theatergoers every week as they see a product in use. Screen advertising will sell your product.
Now, this is the gentleman, my good friend, Jim Bates, who is the source of many of the films that we have in the collection. I did a documentary on Jim called Scenes of War. He worked for the Alexander Film Company from 1937, I think, when he graduated from high school at Colorado Springs High School. He was trained as a cinematographer until the mid-1960s, with the exception of 3 years that he was in the Army Air Corps, and he was a combat photographer in World War II. Well, when I met Jim, I realized this is a story. This is a wonderful story. And on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, 1994, we premiered a documentary, an hour-long documentary on Jim Bates called Scenes of War, on his year of combat in World War II. He actually jumped at D-Day with D-1 with the 82nd Airborne, and he photographed the war in Europe every major battle, Battle of the Bulge. Most famous battle that he filmed was the Battle of Cologne. And he had collected everything that he produced at the Alexander Film Company, plus other films that they had produced. And he had an amazing private collection, close to 100 films, and he donated those films to the Pikes Peak Library District. But Jim Bates designed this helicopter mount in the early 60s, which really helped the Alexander Film Company because they were on hard times at that point. But it was like Steadicam. It was a gyroscope mount that they could do rock-steady aerial shots from a helicopter. And they were hired by many motion picture companies to do these sweeping film shots. Of course, this is before drones. Now drones can do it so easily. But he designed this helicopter mount, and some of the major advertising companies hired the company, Alexander Film Company as well, to shoot these films. Now, one of the most famous commercials that they shot was the 1964 Chevrolet convertible. It was on top of a rock in Moab, Utah, called Pinnacle Rock. It was a very dramatic 2-minute commercial that aired at that time on Bonanza on a Sunday night, which is, was the most popular TV show of its time. And of course, back then when there was only 3 networks, you didn't have much choice to watch anything else. But it was an amazing commercial that I'm going to show you later. They took this poor, frightened 19-year-old model and put her in a Chevrolet that was brought up with a helicopter. They took the engine out of it to lighten it on top of this Pinnacle Rock, and then they did some sweeping shots with this helicopter mount of this poor little poor model in this car, 19-year-old model, waving at the camera and to promote this Chevrolet convertible. But it's a remarkable spot. You may remember it. I mean, I remember it from when it first aired, and for the time, of course, the Mad Men area, Madison Avenue, it was a major television commercial. And Jim was there on the shoot. In fact, he told me a story about the model was so terrified that they had to leave a technician with her who was hiding behind the car. And you'll see in some of the shots where he's hiding behind the car, and I'll point that out to you when I run the commercial. But at the end of the night, or at the end of the day, at the end of the shoot, the wind started to pick up. And it looked like that the model was going to have to spend the night in the Chevrolet with this technician. Well, the technician's wife had come with him on the shoot, and she was very upset. She says, "No way is my husband spending the night in that car with that woman." And fortunately, the wind died down, and they were able to get them both down from the car. But again, one of the most remarkable 2-minute commercials made in that era that was shot with this mount made by Jim Bates. So this is the famous 2-minute commercial I was telling you about, 1964 Chevrolet. And as I mentioned, the poor model didn't want to be left up there alone, so they left a technician with her, and he's hiding behind the car. And I'll point out the shots where you can actually see him.
In a class of its own, it stands alone. Chevrolet for 1964. No other automobile offers so much.
They couldn't possibly do this commercial today for several reasons. They might do it with CGI, but I doubt if they would get permission to put a car on top of a monument, a rock like that. But anyway, if you look under the car, you can see the technician kind of hunched under, hiding behind the car, not to be in the shot.
Pure dedication to beauty and relaxation.
As different shots go by, he picks other places to hide.
Here is space for freedom of movement, enclosed in a Fisher body carving, in motion, as quiet as space itself. In a class of its own, Chevrolet for 1964 stands alone. Chevrolet dealer. Coming Friday, September 28th. Chevrolet for 63, the jet smooth look of luxury. Exciting. 4 entirely different kinds of new cars: Corvette, Corvair, Chevy 2, and Chevrolet for 63. For a good close look and an exciting motoring experience, show at your Chevrolet dealers Friday, September 28th.
Now, the Alexander Film Company did a lot of animation, particularly in the 50s. At first, they lost a lot of business to commercial television. And then, with the growth of outdoor movie theaters, they found an entirely new business opportunity. And what they did is they used the animation to, produce the dancing popcorn and the singing hot dog to help promote the snack bar at the outdoor theaters, the drive-in theaters. And they also did a countdown, a 10-minute countdown. And I can remember going to drive-ins in the 50s and 60s and seeing the Alexander Film countdown. It would say 10 minutes till showtime, 9 minutes to showtime, and they would show another commercial. And it was really quite innovative. So their animation department was quite large at that time and very successful. And here's a sample of some of their animation.
Now that is true, as you will see, no matter what your age may be.
Sun sweet prunes are fresh from the farm, packed with the grown, they're safe from harm.
Fresh from the farm like this one too, fresh from the farm direct to you. 6 or 7 prunes a day are good for you in every way. Buy Sun Sweet prunes and you'll agree, cooked or raw, they're heavenly.
This next film is probably one of the first films shot in Colorado. It was shot by the Edison Company in 1897. Of course, Thomas Edison's company invented the motion picture camera in 1893. And they went around the country filming the United States, the different areas of the country. And one thing they wanted to focus on was on Western life, the Wild West. So they came out to Colorado, and this was shot in El Paso County. You can see the cowboys there are dressed up. They're all wearing white shirts, ties, and vests. I think they wanted to look their best because they knew they were going to be captured on film. What's interesting is that 120 years later, they're still doing the same thing east of El Paso County. They're still raising cattle. So that lifestyle still goes on in Colorado. This is the 1904 film called Tracked by Bloodhounds, or Lynching at Cripple Creek. It's a very historic film because it's an early example of a narrative film. Narrative film being storytelling, which was done with editing. And you can see here a tramp visits this woman in her home, and she's being very gracious. She's decided to feed him, but of course he decides to rob her, and that's when things go wrong. He strangles her, and then he starts to steal things. And before he can leave the house, her daughter comes home and sees that her mother is dead. And then her father finds out. And of course, he has to avenge her death. He puts together a posse, a lynch mob, and they go after the tramp to get their justice. Now, this was shot in Cripple Creek, and Cripple Creek was a gold mining town. They discovered gold there in 1890, and there's some scenes actually of Cripple Creek in the background. But the year before, in 1903, the film called The Great Train Robbery was the first Western ever made, and it was a narrative film as well. It was created with editing, storytelling. So this was just a year later. And it was produced by the Zelig Polyscope Company and directed by Harry Buckwalter, who was famous at that time for doing silent films. But you look at it today, you think it's a fairly simple story. But for the time, in 1904, it was very innovative. And of course, they capture the tramp with some difficulty. But this was probably the second film ever shot in the Pikes Peak region. The first being the 1897 film of the cattle being branded. And like today, every Liam Neeson film that deals with revenge, the father of the girl gets his revenge. This next film was shot in 1925 by the Bell and Howell Company, and it was shot as a promotional film of the attractions in Manitou Springs. This included the Cave of the Winds and Seven Falls. It was found in a garage sale in around 1998 and really is quite a treasure when you look at this film. What's unique is this was during the Roaring '20s and the flapper era, and all the women that they feature in this film are flappers. Of course, nothing has changed in terms of promotional films. They still use pretty young women to sell their products like they do here in this film. But again, this is the Great Gatsby era, and women were bobbing their hair and showing their independence. I've fished in Colorado, but I've never seen fish like this that are in Seven Falls. But they want to attract people to Manitou Springs, so they definitely want to show that there's a lot to do when you come to visit.
When you think of the many philanthropists that have blessed the Pikes Peak region with their generosity, the names of Spencer and Julie Penrose, General Palmer, and Winfield Scott Stratton certainly first come to mind. However, a little-known businessman by the name of Henry Sachs, through his courage and generosity, also left a great legacy in the Pikes Peak region. In this remarkable film, which is part of the Starsmore collection in the Pioneers Museum, we catch a glimpse of the life of Henry Sachs. Henry Sachs was a generous man who believed in equality and integration at a time when it just wasn't accepted in Colorado Springs. Henry Sachs was born in 1862 and made his fortune as a young man in Boston, where he helped finance the Gillette Safety Razor Company. In 1903, he contracted tuberculosis and relocated to Colorado Springs to regain his health. Sachs brought with him to Colorado Springs his African-American chauffeur, James Jeffries, and his housekeeper, Gertrude Lee. These two selfless people cared for Sachs and helped him regain his health. It was that special relationship with these two employees and friends that motivated Sachs to use his money to help the black community in Colorado. Sachs, who was Jewish, also suffered from the same discrimination that the black citizens in Colorado Springs experienced at that time, and both blacks and Jews were not welcome in some of the businesses in the Pikes Peak region. As shown in this 1928 film, Sachs would sponsor an annual picnic for the black community. The picnics, which were held in Stratton Park, happened during a time when the state of Colorado was under the influence of the resurgence of the Klan. Even the governor of Colorado in the mid-1920s, Clarence Morley, was connected to the Klan. What was unique about this picnic is that it was actually integrated. The Jewish Women's Council, as seen in this film, were co-sponsors of the event, and both the Jewish and black community used the picnic to become friends and learn more about each other's cultures. It was in the home of Lulu Stroud Pollard during the 1920s that Sachs came up with the idea of using his money to create a scholarship to help blacks get an education. He paid for the college education of Effie Stroud, Lulu's sister and an honor student at Colorado Springs High School. That was the beginning of the Sachs Foundation. The Sachs Foundation is a nonprofit academic scholarship fund for African American students in Colorado who have a 3.6 grade point average or better. Henry Sachs died in 1952, but the Sachs Foundation is still thriving in Colorado Springs. and they have provided over $15 million in scholarships to approximately 7,000 students. The courage and generosity of Henry Sachs is still benefiting the state of Colorado, and his foundation is a remarkable legacy for one of our finest citizens.
Until 1949, life in Cripple Creek revolved around train service in and out of the district. In 1929, 18-year-old Colorado City resident Ira Current bought one of the first 16mm cameras. With his hand-crank silent camera, Ira Current decided to capture history. His film is now one of the most remarkable motion picture archives of the mining district. A lifetime photographer now in his 90s, Ira Current talked about his amazing day on the Midland.
Tell us about the day you went up to Cripple Creek. Why did you decide to do this film? And
Oh, I just figured it ought to be done. Be a nice trip, yeah. And I just wanted to make a picture of it. Shot another series, you've got that too, I guess, of the freight train going up U Pass.
what do you remember from that day? You had the tripod, the camera, and one
That's
thing
right.
that I've always was impressed by your films is your camera angles. You're always looking for something different, mounting at different locations.
Well,
and what do you remember from that day?
Well, first, with that camera, the finders are very nice to use. I mean, it had one on top and one in back, so you could actually see what you're doing very well. The trouble with maybe shooting out of the side of the train, going around curves, is getting the camera mounted on the tripod. And I had to lean the tripod over the edge of the observation car of the train, and then tilt the head and turn the camera sideways so that it would be square, and then do my cranking there without knocking it over or having it fall off or something like that.
And how much was it to take the Midland at that time to Cripple Creek? Do you
Well,
remember?
I think it was under $5. I believe it was maybe 2.5, but I may be wrong.
Was it still a pretty wild town, or was it?
It was sort of dying down after the gold sort of petered out. But there was, as you saw in that picture, an old prospector. I wanted to be set up earlier to get him walking towards the camera, but I only got him as he came around the corner and put his pickaxe down. I thought that was kind of nice.
This next film was shot by Ira Current in 1929. It's of one of the first soapbox derby races in the country. This unofficial race was shot in Old Colorado City near 8th Street and was inspired by the Pikes Peak Hill Climb motor race. Ira's brother and his friends built these soapbox derby cars. 3 years later, the first official soapbox derby race occurred in Akron, Ohio in 1933. Most of the clips I'm showing you in this program can be seen in their entirety on YouTube. If you purchase my book, there's no such thing as a typical librarian. I do have a YouTube index in the book that you can go to find them. This next clip is a remarkable 1930 color film that was shot in Colorado Springs at the Woodman Sanatorium. Colorado Springs was known as a great place to take the cure for tuberculosis because of its dry climate and warm sunshine. And the Woodman Insurance Company at that time built a sanatorium in Colorado Springs that cured thousands of people. This was before antibiotics, and back then, to take the cure for tuberculosis, it took a couple years of rest and sunshine. This film is called Land of Sunshine, and it does show you different sites around Colorado Springs, and it's a nice time capsule of that era in 1930.
At the foot of Pikes Peak in Colorado is nestled the city of Colorado Springs, well known to thousands of visitors and tourists from all over the world. Out of town, over the Mesa Road, after passing the famous Garden of the Gods, a roadside sign points the way to a famous institution a few miles distant. We follow directions, and on we go, the mountains on our left, the open plains on our right. We catch our first glimpse of a wonderful beauty spot at the foot of Mount Cedar, where once was waste and barren land, transformed by human hands and nature into a haven of health-giving and life-saving by that fraternal insurance society, Modern Woodmen of America. No scenic tour of the Pikes Peak region is complete without a stop at this unusual institution, where during the summer season an average of 11,000 visitors are welcome. Here since 1909, this sanatorium has been conquering tuberculosis, furnishing free treatment and care to the afflicted. From Mount Rose, there unfolds a view of this tiny town of Woodmen, Colorado, where through an investment of $1.5 million, 9,500 afflicted members have received its benefits, most of them being restored to health and future usefulness. Within the receiving hospital's walls of native stone are complete and modern facilities for the comfort and care of afflicted but hopeful patients. The superintendent, medical staff, and graduate nurses are there to serve. Patients, as soon as able, are graduated from the receiving hospital to individual tent cottages. They're small but comfortable homes. Chasing the cure in the sunshine is required daily here in an altitude of 7,000 feet. Rest, quiet, and sunshine, pure fresh air, the tonic of nature here in abundance. The medical staff members are specialists in their line. Graduate nurses give patients individual care and constant attention in hospital and colony. When do we eat? Now and how? Each man takes a good appetite with him to the dining room. 240 patients at one time can be cared for with their every need supplied in the way of shelter, food, and treatment, free of charge to them. The best of food and plenty of it to build up strength, one of the main requisites of treatment. Groups of patients whose improvement is well advanced are taken on scenic rides in sanatorium autos to points of interest, and this cheerful group is about to take advantage of a beautiful, bright day for that purpose. And now they're off and away they go. This is much better than being housed in hospital or tent cottages. It's their day off. It has been a long climb from the canyon upward into the sky, but the experience is ample reward. In and through the famous Garden of the Gods, on marvelous winding roads, one of the showplaces of the Pikes Peak region. With its peculiarly colored and fantastically shaped rocks, a mecca for tourists and sightseers. An unexpected spot where many pause for a while and sometimes chat with the Indians, whose forefathers once roamed the gorgeous Garden of the Gods. But there are other sights to see on other days to come. Later brought back to health at this great Hope Station and taught how to live, patients leave for home. Cheerio and good luck, a happy going away. Since the year 1909, this scene has been almost a daily occurrence for those whose lives have been saved for future usefulness. Back to the world of work, to families, friends, and neighbors, from the land of sunshine.
This next clip is from the documentary The History of the Cheyenne Mountain School. It was written and narrated by Richard Merrill, a graduate of the Cheyenne Mountain School. The films in this segment were shot by Dr. Lloyd Shaw on 16mm film in the 1920s and 1930s. I talk about Dr. Lloyd Shaw in my book, There Is No Such Thing as a Typical Librarian, in the chapter, The Finest Educator in Colorado. Dr. Lloyd Shaw was an innovative educator who started out as a teacher in 1916 at Cheyenne Mountain School, eventually became a principal and then the superintendent before his retirement in 1951.
Welcome to a visual history of Cheyenne Mountain School and the surrounding area of Colorado Springs. The video you are about to see is taken from film shot by Dr. Lloyd Shaw during the 1920s and 30s. About 400 students were enrolled in the entire kindergarten through 12th grade system. Approximately 90 students were enrolled in the high school, which was 9th through 12th. In this next photo, another person that most students from that period will recognize is Dr. Lloyd Pappy Shaw. He was superintendent of District 12 from 1916 to 1951. During the time that Dr. Shaw was superintendent of District 12, both the kindergarten and the main building were located on premises of the present Cheyenne Mountain Junior High School. The school conducted numerous activities for students, among them snow skiing for those in high school. In this opening scene, students are skiing on Pikes Peak from 14 Milepost near Devil's Playground to Glen Cove. During the early part of the 20th century, the ski lifts, T-bars, chairlifts that we are accustomed to now did not exist. And for many students on these skiing trips, the skiing was actually done in areas where there were no lifts. Students would ski to the bottom of the hill, pack up their skis on the back, climb to the top of the mountain, and come down again, so that by the end of the day, everyone was thoroughly exhausted. In this scene, we see students from Cheyenne at Crescent Ranch, which is located near Divide, Colorado. Today, that's a key place for moving on to Cripple Creek. The school also sponsored camping trips for both boys and girls, and in this scene, we see boys skiing during a camping trip taken at Independence Pass on the Continental Divide leading over to Aspen. The tradition of good tennis existed even in the 1920s and 30s at Cheyenne School. Here we see the tennis courts located at the east end of the school grounds near the present junior high. During this period of the 20s and 30s, the school also kept a 3-hole golf course on the west half of the school grounds. Some of the golfers that we recognize are Bill Wyman, Lloyd Nelson, and Joe Comiska. One of the popular sports at the school was track and field. In this particular meet, Manitou was the opposing team. At this time, the community of Colorado Springs had a population of between 25 and 30,000, and there was no addition or building at Cheyenne School until the late 40s. Another popular club at Cheyenne School was the $5 Ford Club. This club was so named because students, theoretically, were to restrict cost of preparing cars to $5 each. More than this amount was sometimes spent, and not all the stripped downs were Model T Fords. In this section, you'll see students driving in Sweet Potato Gulch or Rat Alley in North Cheyenne Canyon. And later you'll see them challenging the clay banks at 19th and Manitou Boulevard. Another interesting aspect of life at Cheyenne School was the Glider Club. This glider was purchased from Alexander Aircraft in Colorado Springs. The glider shed was on school grounds and was constructed by Mr. Hench under the supervision of Frank Evans, who was the shop teacher. This shed was on the west side of the school grounds. The glider was put together and then loaded onto a truck. From the school, it was taken across the school grounds, onto a road, and then up to Cresta Vista, where the present Cheyenne Mountain High School exists. The instructor was Mr. Dwight Spencer. The Glider Club only existed for 1 year, and that was 1931. Once up on Cresta Vista, where there were no roads, no Cresta Road, and no 21st Street, it was often taken to a height of 150 feet. The glider had been constructed by Alexander Aircraft in Colorado Springs. Alexander's had originally started in Denver and later moved to Colorado Springs in 1927. Alexander's had developed the famous Eagle Rock, which was the name of one of the planes they built. To commemorate this glider, a special stamp was made by Cheyenne School honoring the first flight. After 1 year, the glider was sold to a man who attempted to fly it off of Pikes Peak with disastrous results. Rodeo was an important aspect of life for Dr. Shaw. He distinguished himself at an educators' conference one time by advocating the rodeo as a safer sport than football, and he proceeded to conduct a genuine rodeo, Brahma bulls and all. And the only casualty was to himself, for he broke 3 ribs trying to bulldog a steer. He mastered the double loop, rope spin, and refused to wear any hat but a broad-brimmed Stetson. He memorized the shooting of Dan McGrew to the last bitter syllable and gladly proclaimed it for any willing listener. He pastured several dozen horses on the school mesa and refused to ride in a car unless it was absolutely necessary. In this scene, we see a nature study excursion being taken by Miss Ethel Botting's 2nd grade class. The students board the school bus and go to Sweet Potato Gulch in North Cheyenne Canyon. Not only was nature studied in the classroom and on the school grounds, but there were numerous excursions into the area. There were camping trips for high school students, trips to Pat's Pile, And even beginning in kindergarten and first grade, students had to learn about the area in which they lived. Deer frequently roamed this area in the 1930s and were seen on the school grounds also. On top of the school, Shaw had built an observatory with a telescope, and here are scenes of students setting up the telescope and viewing. Across the street from Cheyenne Mountain School, Shaw had developed a nature preserve. That is now the site of the Canyon Elementary School. But during these years of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the nature preserve was an important facet of education at Cheyenne. Come to know the animals, the birds, the wildlife, the plants, the stream that went through that property. Here we see a woman bringing feed to the birds during the snowy season. One of the practices at the school was to conduct camping trips each fall and spring. One weekend, all the boys would go on a camping trip, and another weekend, all the girls would go. This was part of Shaw's philosophy on a total education. There were many students who owned their own horses and would ride them to school, and during classes the horses would then graze in surrounding area. But in addition, the school would also at times rent horses so that everyone had a chance to ride. Each year, Lloyd Shaw would take the senior class to Rocky Mountain National Park. And here we see the old school bus and the students unloading the baggage and so forth and their visits to that great park. In addition to visiting Rocky Mountain National Park on this trip, students also stopped at Lakeside near Denver for rides on the roller coaster. Viewing the students riding on top of the bus and on the hood and on the fenders of the car, one realizes that the requirements have changed over the years. In the mid-30s, Lloyd Shaw became very interested in Western square dancing. He became a fine square dance caller, and square dancing replaced the European folk dancing at Cheyenne Mountain School. But as happened previously, the students became so proficient that they were invited to various events around the state to perform as square dancers. Eventually, by the early 1940s, the square dance team, composed of students from Cheyenne Mountain School, was traveling around the United States and putting on performances. Shaw himself became the foremost square dance caller in the United States. It was an activity that was limited not to students on the team, but everyone in the school could square dance. He called for dancing at noontime on Wednesday evenings. But the team itself practiced regularly and put on performances around the country and received a great deal of notoriety. During one summer vacation, Lloyd Shaw was invited to Hollywood, where he was a caller for the movie Duel in the Sun, which starred Gregory Peck. The Colorado poet Thomas Hornsby Farrell once said about Lloyd Shaw, Put him in a ballroom, a stable, a tent, or any place where shoes can scuff the naked prairie, and his spirit instantly generates the spiritual environment for dancing. And if it seems to come from his jovial roars, his warm cadences, his special whispers, his smile, or the beat of his foot, it more truly comes from something deep in his character that causes him to behave this way. Long perspectives on America and beyond America, his love of his own West, the land itself, and the people, their long faring from sea to sea.
In this next segment, I feature clips of 2 films produced by Spencer Penrose on the attractions he built in the Pikes Peak region. Curious Colorado, produced in 1936, and Magic Beneath the Clouds, produced in 1937. In Magic Beneath the Clouds, you actually hear the voice of Spencer Penrose as he talks about the Will Rogers Shrine and his personal friendship with Will Rogers. Spencer Penrose and his wife Julie were 2 of the greatest philanthropists of Colorado. They created the Alpamar Foundation with their personal wealth, and the foundation has given away millions of dollars every year to Colorado nonprofit organizations. Spencer Penrose built the Broadmoor Hotel and the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, which are both featured in these historic films.
Believe It or Not columns has referred to the Cheyenne Mountain Auto Highway as being the crookedest road in all the world. One need not write to the popular Mr. Ripley for proof of this. He need only closely follow our camera trip to the summit of Cheyenne Mountain. Overcoming the most redoubtable obstacles, the road leads to the summit, where one finds a unique lodge, which, like the highway, is a tribute to modern engineering and construction. Built on the Southwest Indian style of architecture, it represents an investment of $100,000. Here is the terminal, the rest haven for the motorist, and an ideal excursion is to spend the night at the lodge and arise to behold the most beautiful sunrise in the world from the summit of this high mountain. Out on the observation tower, which commands an excellent view of the surrounding grandeur, sights such as this are not uncommon. Sometimes oceans of clouds shut out the view of the valley below, and from our perch just above the lodge, look for all the world like a troubled sea. Jealous of the attention paid to her lesser sisters, old Pikes Peak rears her head through the mist, and before night falls, we will be grinding our cameras from the highest point on her queenly head. It is a day of beauty atop Cheyenne Mountain. We are high above the clouds, which boil and steam as if from a giant tea kettle. The valley below is under a ceiling of mist and shadows, but we are on top of the world in the bright sunshine. Every visitor to the Pikes Peak region makes inquiry regarding the white gash cut in the mountainside just west of Manitou Springs. Put on your hiking togs and a warm jacket, and we'll ride to one of the highest points in the Rockies via the Mount Manitou Scenic Incline route, the route that is responsible for the scar on the face of the mountain. Rising at the rate of 3 feet per second, 167 feet per minute, these visitors will arrive at the summit in 16 minutes and find themselves 1/2 mile above the little station from whence they started. Here is a curious means of transportation, a cable road. Although the track is only 1 1/4 miles in length, the difference in elevation between the starting point and the summit is 2,600 feet, more than 1/2 mile. There is no chance of the car breaking away and taking its passengers for a roller coaster ride deluxe. Each car is permanently attached to a haulage cable, tested to 90,000 pounds. You'll say that even it might break. Let it break. 2 safety cables and automatic clutches stop the descent instantly. Oh, some killjoy among you might ask where you would go if all the cables broke. Well, that depends entirely upon the kind of life you've been living. Meet Manitou, a genuine, unsophisticated Rocky Mountain canary, or burro to you Easterners. Manitou and his fellow beasts of burden make their living by hauling people over the well-known mountain trails that lead from the summit to various points of interest on Mount Manitou. Cheyenne Mountain is the world's most unique, privately owned zoological garden. Erected at the cost of thousands of dollars, it has the distinction of being the largest and best equipped zoo in the West. Thousands of wild animals from all over the world are on exhibition here, and when one considers that it is just the hobby of one man, the zoo becomes more interesting than ever. Speaking of mountains again, here is a mountain of animal flesh. This elephant is a baby as far as elephants go. Her name, strange to say, is Shirley Temple, for in the elephant world she is Shirley's double, small, affectionate, cute, and a performer. Shirley is 14 years old, is 7 feet high, and like most women will not tell her weight. She is the newest arrival at the zoo. To be beneath the famed London Bridge when it was falling down would be comparable to being beneath Shirley as she lowers her huge hook in a difficult feat. Although small for an elephant, she weighs enough to make a good impression should she accidentally slip. Shirley bids for popularity at the zoo and gets it. No matter what the Republicans or Democrats may do in the line of politics, Josephine has a platform all her own. She electioneers for more and bigger peanuts, and to prove her statements, demonstrates how hard it is for the average chimpanzee to work the peanut machines. At best, it's a hand-to-mouth existence, says Josephine. A fellow candidate has given her a cigar, and she retires to her cage to find out whether or not it is any better than her own brand of election cigars. While Annette, her sister, takes her daily dozen on the flying trapeze just in front of the camera, Josephine reclines to find enjoyment and puffs and puffs and... In all America, there is no railroad so unique as the one that climbs the steep slopes of Pikes Peak near Colorado Springs. Since 1891, these strange little engines and these miniature coaches of the Pikes Peak Cog Railway have transported 675,000 people to the summit of the lofty mountain. In all the world, there are only 3 similar roads, and they are in the heart of the Swiss Alps. Over the 9 miles of main track, 4 little trains each make 2 daily trips to the summit and return. The summit station is more than 2½ miles above sea level, and in some places along the route, the grade exceeds 25%. With the roadbed cleared of snow, it is only a few days until the first passenger train makes the maiden trip of the year. When people in the valley are dressed in summer attire, the peak still presents a picture of winter. Although a great deal of snow has melted, some high drifts remain until midsummer, and the train proceeds cautiously around the curves, where the banks of ice are higher than the train itself, and a cave-in would mean that the train crew would have to man shovels to clear the track. While the engineer oils his engine and replenishes the water supply, the passengers leave the coach to have a snow fight. A good snowball fight is great in winter, but it's greater in summer when the lower world feels the effects of a rising thermometer. It is a strange sight to see snowballs flying in the middle of June, when in other places the population is devising means to keep cool. No ice packs for these maids with rosy cheeks. They'll take theirs nature's way, and the more snow they get thrown at them, the better they like it. As we reach the summit after a journey made in complete comfort, we cannot help but think of General Zebulon Pike, the discoverer of the peak, and his little handful of foot-weary soldiers who long ago stood at the foot of the mountain and said that man would never set foot upon the top. General Pike turned his back on the mountains, firm in his belief that this giant of the Rockies would defy all efforts of man to reach its summit. But man, on his march of progress, not only conquered the peak, but has made the ascent possible for all. Our hands grow cold as the temperature hovers around zero, but we grind on, for the day is clear and clouds below us will make a beautiful picture, to say nothing of the ladies. As we leave the summit, we reflect that our day spent in curious Colorado has been complete except for one thing: an interview with the man who has caused these things to become realities, the man who has made his own dreams come true. Meet Spencer Penrose, who as a young man sought his fortune in the gold fields of Cripple Creek, Colorado. Colorado gave up much of its precious yellow metal to this man, but he saw another wealth in the great state, a wealth that cannot be counted in dollars and cents. A lover of the outdoors and of animals, Mr. Penrose wanted the world to see the beauties that were his to see every day. And so he built most of the attractions that are to be found in the Pikes Peak region, so that his fellow men might take advantage of the beauties of nature. So farewell to Colorado, a curious, colorful state.
Swift, powerful, Rio Grande's cracked scenic limited forces the rising sun to stand still as mile after mile of spectacular scenery unfolds in a panoramic prologue on our journey from Denver to Colorado Springs. Vacation paradise. Modern air-conditioned dining cars provide food thrills for appetites that are renewed and sharpened by fragrant pine-spiced breezes. Comfort is stressed, and the crystal-clear window panes become magic mirrors that reflect ever-changing vistas and recollections. Then suddenly we thrill to our first glimpse of majestic Pikes Peak, its dome-piercing heaven, and realize that we're nearing Colorado Springs, the first stop of a trip never to be forgotten. The train almost noiselessly comes to a smooth stop. Our destination is reached, and Colorado Springs becomes the gateway to magic beneath the clouds. First impression of this city is the invigorating atmosphere. Almost 6,000 feet of elevation stirs us into activity, and jaded interests are whipped into a desire to do something, to find the wonder spots that abound in the Pikes Peak region. In 1871, when Rio Grande rails first pointed toward the mountains, General William J. Palmer, empire builder, envisioning a model city, planned and founded Colorado Springs. 60-odd years have passed. Today, Colorado Springs is more than a pioneer's dream. It is a magnificent city, modern in every respect. Just a stone's throw from Colorado Springs is the beautiful Broadmoor section, the recreational center of America's scenic playground. Impressive and in a world all of its own, on Cheyenne Mountain looms the Shrine of the Sun. Built of enduring stone from the West he loved, this shrine is an everlasting memorial to Will Rogers. Appropriate indeed that it was created by his intimate friend Spencer Penrose, famous Coloradoan.
Will Rogers was humorous, philosopher, and friend to all mankind. He recognized the obligations of good citizenship and lived accordingly. I valued his friendship and life and revere his memory. The Shrine of the Sun on Cheyenne Mountain is my tribute to Will Rogers, a memorial designed to keep alive forever the inspiration of a great American.
Crystal clear waters of Broadmoor Lake reflect the stately outline of this renowned hostelry, an entrancing picture broken only by aquatic activity.
These next two films were shot by the Alexander Film Company and donated by former employee Jim Bates. The first film is a Chevrolet truck promotional film shot in 1957, showing the Chevy truck off-road going up Pikes Peak. The second film is a 2-minute commercial on a 1964 Chevrolet Corvair, showing it jumping sand dunes at the Great Sand Dunes National Park. I doubt if you can get permission today to jump sand dunes in a national park. Jim told me that the Corvair really didn't do that well and broke several axles. Of course, through the magic of editing, they looked like they performed like four-wheel drive Jeeps.
The question has often been asked, why do men climb mountains? The classic answer is, because the mountains are there. Another and more reasonable explanation is that we wish to pit our strength, stamina, and endurance against the greatest challenge Mother Nature can place in our path. Meeting that challenge makes us champions. Chevrolet trucks long ago established their claim as champions of the road. In 1956, they again proved their championship caliber by conquering the grueling Alcan Highway to Alaska. A tougher road test couldn't be found. A new challenge will have to be off the road, cross country, straight up the hill. Pikes Peak, the most famous mountain in America, thunders its defiance. And Chevrolet accepts the challenge. A Chevrolet truck will ascend to the top of Pikes Peak off the road without using the auto highway. 2 Chevrolet Task Force pickup trucks with Thriftmaster engine and 4-wheel drive are selected and certified as production models, equipped only with items available through any Chevrolet dealer. With 2 experienced mountain drivers at the wheel, the trucks leave the garage and go through scenic Colorado Springs to begin the colorful drive leading to the actual jumping-off point for the cross-country ascent of the peak. Past the historic gold mining town of Cripple Creek and through narrow abandoned railroad tunnels, they travel the seldom-used Gold Camp Road to the beginning of the actual climb. Then, it's off the road and across open terrain to Pikes Peak or bust. And there she is, ominous, foreboding, an incredible challenge. And on they climb, powering their way past fantastic rock formations, around crystal clear mountain lakes, and straight into virgin timberland, through chassis battering terrain, and up engine straining grades. The trucks keep on going, keep on climbing, offering conclusive evidence that Chevrolet trucks have that never-say-die dependability needed on every job. This amazing performance record being established on Pikes Peak proves beyond a doubt that Chevrolet Task Force trucks are rugged, able to take it, more than a match for the toughest jobs. And now, the peak is actually in sight, better than 2,000 feet straight up. So near, and yet so far. Now well above 13,000 feet, the drivers literally find themselves living in the clouds. But they keep moving, gaining altitude, climbing right above the clouds, and emerging to find the most formidable obstacle yet encountered, a vast field of impossible-appearing boulders and rocks. Their courage, however, is soon reinforced by the appearance of a small party of mountaineers who have come down from the peak to help guide them over the most precarious stretch of the climb. But make it does, straight up the face of the mountain, all the way to the top. 14,110 feet up in the clouds. Both drivers and observers are amazed at the performance of the Chevrolet Task Force truck, which stood up to the unprecedented challenge in every way, making the almost impossible ascent without mechanical difficulty of any sort.
Great Sand Dunes, Colorado. Miles and miles of sand, so desolate only the timeless winds call it home. No place for a car. But no problem for a Chevy Corvair. By special permission of the United States Department of the Interior, the Corvair Monza, the four-door Corvair sedan, and the new Corvair Lakewood wagon took on this mountainous desert. The Corvairs dig in. Thanks to their rear-engine traction, the Corvairs claw their way through the sinking, smothering sand. Climbing, climbing, climbing to the top. Incredible performance and traction, plus sure handling. Take them up. Up. Over. And down the towering dunes. Amazing performance? Sure. All that's needed is one desert and 3 cars. Three Chevy Corvairs. Whatever you expect of an automobile, from the suburbs to the Sahara, if it can be done, Corvair's the car that can do it.
This next film clip was shot by Alexander Film Company film director Lou Tilley back in 1958. It features the original Carnegie Library in Colorado Springs when Colorado Springs had a population of 90,000 people. The Pikes Peak Library District is now one of the finest library districts in the country, and they serve a community of 700,000 people. The original Carnegie was restored in 2002 and now houses special collections and the wonderful photography and film archives of the Pikes Peak region. of the most prominent educational institutions in the country is the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. In 1955, a promotional documentary was produced called The Class of '59, encouraging qualified high school graduates to apply for the academy. This is when the Air Force Academy operated out of the Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. In 1958, the academy moved to their current campus north of Colorado Springs. The entire documentary, The Class of '59, can be seen on YouTube.
Dear Jim, I'm not much of a hand at writing letters, but you asked me to give you the straight dope about the Air Force Academy, and I'm going to try. We arrived here at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver bright and early on July 11th. The Air Force Academy is located here temporarily until the new buildings are completed at Colorado Springs. Swearing in began shortly after 0600, that is 6 a.m. in civilian language, and from then on things happened on the double. Air Force officers, called ATOs, short for Air Training Officers, assembled us in groups and taught us how to march, face, and salute. After practically all our hair was cut off in real super crew cuts, we assembled at the drill ground in our uniforms, and right then began close-order drilling. Seemed like a sudden plunge into basic, until we realized we were to march into the dedication area in a few hours. And man, don't think we weren't nervous as we marched to our seats, in front of our folks and guests and lots of important people from Washington. There were a lot of words spoken that day that I don't remember, but the gist of it was that this was a great occasion. We, the class of 1959, which means the year we graduate, were the first, the pioneers of the new academy. We were not only going to be officers, but many of us even generals, someday that is. Our class of around 300 had been selected from over 6,000 candidates, and don't think we weren't proud of that. Yeah, proud and scared too. Scared that maybe we couldn't toe the mark or make the grade. But there was a thought that will always stick with me. The idea that the Air Force is organized not only to fight if necessary, but to help prevent war. In this atomic age, a strong Air Force ought to make an enemy think twice before starting anything. Yes, sir, I feel real proud to be a part, even a tiny part, of the Air Force team. If you were suddenly to drop in during one of our meals at the dining hall, you'd probably think we had all slipped our gears. Seems like everyone is talking or shouting at once. Well, there are a number of special reasons for our behavior in the dining hall. First, even at Annapolis or West Point, all first-year students are required to sit at attention during meals. But in addition, special words we will use as Air Force officers are worked into our everyday language, especially in the dining hall, to teach us to concentrate and to communicate information clearly. During basic military training, we sure did a lot of drilling. Feet were marching all over the place. But the ATOs were sharp, and the formations improved rapidly. We are taught military courtesy and discipline and the importance of duty and honor. The highlight of the bivouac was a special series of demonstrations. One group dealt with lectures on the principles of chemical, biological, and radiological warfare, demonstrations of typical weapons. After 2 months of basic military training, our academic program began in September. We marched down to the cadet store and lined up to receive the books we would need for our studies. 65 pounds of knowledge costing us $84.13. No one could doubt that we had some heavyweight studies in the bag, but getting them into our heads was another question. As called for by our daily schedule of classes, we bring along the necessary books and assemble outside our barracks. Then we march to the quadrangle buildings where most of the classes are held. Our work at the Academy is divided broadly into two phases, the airmanship program and the academic. The purpose of the airmanship program is to train and condition a cadet for his destined role of leadership in military aviation. Recently, we made a trip to the permanent site of the Academy in the beautiful country near Colorado Springs. At a high point in the highway, our buses stopped so that we could get a good view of the site of the future Academy. In our mind's eye, we superimposed the architect's preliminary concept of the future buildings over the site. The classrooms, the offices, the barracks, the athletic facilities, the parade ground, even the future classes that would join us at the Academy. And that reminds me, you asked about getting into the next class. Well, the age limit is 17 through 21 years of age, and the deadline for nominations is January 31st. If you want to become a cadet, the first thing to do is write to your United States representative or senator and ask him to nominate you, or to write for information to the United States Air Force Academy Appointment Branch, Washington 25, D.C. Everyone has an equal chance to compete, so send in your letter at once, because nominations are being accepted now for the next class of cadets. I'd like to give you another tip, too. Make the best grades you can and keep yourself in good shape physically, because your high school record and your physical condition will be important factors in the Air Force's final choice of cadets. Before closing, let me tell you something special that happened the other day. Jed Bosch had already given us an idea of what was coming, but it was still a great thrill when it happened. On Sunday, the word arrived that President Eisenhower and his party were at the Academy to watch us at a parade and to join us at chapel services. Let me tell you, there was an extra snap on our formation. I don't know how sharp we looked, but we sure tried. It was an honor for the class of '59 to parade before President Eisenhower, who 40 years ago was also a cadet in the class of 1915. And somehow, we felt that through the President, the entire country was watching us and placing great hopes in our future. We were proud to be cadets in the class of '59, and we looked forward to the 4-year program which would lead not only to a college degree, but to bars on our shoulders, observer wings on our chests, and to a career with an unlimited future in the United States Air Force.
I've written a book about my 30-year career as a librarian entitled There's No Such Thing as a Typical Librarian. Many of the films I featured in this program I talk about in great detail in my book. There's also a YouTube index in my book for all of the historic films. The book is a love letter to my career as a librarian and the importance of local libraries to their communities. You can purchase this book through Amazon for $19.95. I produced this program on my laptop at home during the coronavirus lockdown. I retired 3 years ago, and after writing my book, I've given over 20 programs locally to libraries, museums, and historical societies on my book and on the history of the Pikes Peak region. 4 of my programs in April and May were canceled because of the virus. I refused to let that stop me from sharing this unique film history for the community. Out of my frustration, I discovered this presentation software, decided to record my program and upload it on YouTube. If you have any questions or would like to learn how you could do the same thing with a history program you might be presenting, please email me at anton1492@gmail.com. Hopefully our country will get back to normal soon, and I urge you to continue to support your local libraries and museums. It is a wonderful resource for families, young people going to summer reading programs and story times, and older seniors and lifelong learners like myself.